This guide to your Scottish ancestry is a journey of discovery sweeping through the ages, to meet with ghosts of times past, to hear their stories, to explore the ancient castles, the homes of your ancestors, and discover the roots and richness of your Scottish heritage.
Alexander Tunian was a well-respected mountaineer, born and raised in Aberdeenshire. He was a proud Scotsman who knew the various peaks like the back of his hand. It was October of 1943 when he decided to set off on an expedition into the Cairngorms on his own, a mountain range in the Eastern Highlands and home to the highest, coldest and snowiest plateaus in all of Britain, as well as the nation's second highest peak, Ben Macdui. He had set out on a 10-day hike through the range. The passes only dipped slightly in places, making it a not too difficult walk through the various peaks. He kept his supplies low, instead choosing to bring along a revolver to try and pick up some small game along the journey. It had been largely an uneventful few days, but Alexander was happy to be out here alone, facing some of Scotland's most beautiful sights as he conquered the peaks. That was until the afternoon that he approached the top of Ben Macdui. He looked out across the range, uninterrupted views for miles all around him. It seemed he was the only one taking this hike on that autumn afternoon. As he reached the summit though, the weather took a sudden turn. A dense mist seemed to roll in from nowhere. The sky turned dark and the wind whipped up. Alexander was sure that a storm was about to begin, so he quickly started to descend down one of the paths. The mist began to envelop him, and visibility on the path became very narrow. But Alexander was used to conditions like this, and it didn't really faze him. That was until he heard it. Alexander was moving with quite a quick pace down the path, but he could hear a noise coming from behind him. It was footsteps. At first he kind of assumed it was the echo of his own, but they were slower, out of step with the man's movements. There had been no one else at the top, so who was coming down the mountain behind him? And the steps were loud, too loud. Something was wrong. His mind instantly went to the stories of Ben Macdui. He had never really taken it seriously, but for years now, people had speculated that there was something wrong with this mountain, that someone or something resided here, something that wasn't of our world. It was a silly superstition, Alexander thought, but still he found himself reaching down to the butt of his gun, feeling a sense of comfort from the weight in his pocket. The wind was growing stronger, but Alexander stopped for a moment. The footsteps continued. It certainly wasn't his. He turned to look back up the path, and there, in the mist, he could just make out the silhouette of what looked like a person, slowly moving towards him. But as it grew closer and closer, the silhouette got larger and larger. This person was tall, far too tall. The figure stopped. Alexander called out, but with no reply, and then it unexpectedly charged towards him. Just this shadow barreling down on him. Alexander panicked. He wanted it to stop, but when it didn't, he pulled out his revolver and fired in the direction of the figure 3 times. Alexander couldn't believe it. Each bullet just seemed to pass through it. The figure in the mist was gaining quickly, still rushing towards him. Alexander didn't fire again. He turned and ran. Visibility was poor, and he knew one wrong step could lead to him being seriously injured, if not worse. but something told him that whatever was in that mist was far more dangerous. He didn't look back. He ran for miles, getting down to Glenderry as fast as he could. It would be over a decade before he shared his story. He couldn't believe it for the longest time, but after a while it became apparent that Alexander wasn't alone. Many have claimed to experience something like this before him, and many have claimed it since, because there is something very strange about Ben Macdui. What that strangeness is varies from person to person. For decades, people have debated about what it is, but it is most commonly referred to as the Big Grey Man. This one really brings together a whole host of paranormal theories. It has it all. So get yourself a warm drink, or a cold one if you're as hot as I am right now. Dim the lights and get comfortable. It's time to visit the snowy peaks of the Scottish Highlands. This is the terrifying mystery of Ben Macdui, Scotland's strangest mountain. We're going to be jumping about quite a bit timeline-wise in this one. The stories about the Grey Man have been present for a long time, but take on a different flavour at points, so please bear with me here. While it might not be the very first sighting, it makes the most sense for us to begin our exploration of this topic with Professor Norman Collie. This story only became public in 1925, but actually took place in 1891, and is by far the most famous of all the Grey Man tales. Collie was a keen mountaineer. He had traversed everywhere from the Himalayas to the Rockies, and most peaks in between. He was described as a striking figure with a dry manner, and he did not suffer fools gladly. He would often be spotted wearing a battered deerstalker hat, with some believing he actually served as inspiration for the character of Sherlock Holmes. While mountaineering was his passion, his profession was science. He served as Professor of Organic Chemistry at University College London, before becoming head of its chemistry department in 1913. It was towards the end of his time there that he delivered a speech at the general meeting of the Cairngorms Club in Aberdeen. It was a cold December evening as Collie stepped up in front of the group after dinner. He spoke a few words about the evening's events, a little about his experiences walking the peaks of Scotland, and told fun tales of his adventures. But then he hesitated for a moment, before bringing up the mountain, Ben Macdui. He said he had experienced something strange up there, something he hasn't experienced in all his years of mountaineering, something that stuck with him for decades. He explained that he had been walking down from the marker that represented the peak of the mountain. A mist had begun to roll in. However, it was nothing that concerned the man. But as he walked, he heard a crunch, and then another. At first he assumed it was just the sound of his own footsteps echoing, but they didn't match up with his own movements, and they seemed to be getting closer. He explained it felt like someone was walking down from the summit behind him, taking steps that were 3 or 4 times the length of his own. But this was impossible. There was no one else up there with him. He paused. The footsteps continued. He looked back, but he could make out no figure in the mist approaching him. A little concerned now, Collie turned and began walking again. Crunch, crunch, came the sounds from behind him. Closer and closer. That was when panic set in and Collie began to run. He estimated he moved quickly between the boulders for 4 or 5 miles, before reaching the Rothmerkus forest. Only then did he dare to look back up towards the peak. The mist had cleared, and there was no one as far as the eye could see. He stated that he didn't know what he experienced, but that there was something very strange about the top of Ben Macdui, and he would refuse to return on his own. While this is the most famously recounted version of Collie sharing his story, it appears he actually told the odd friend over the years, and his story had previously reached a man named Dr. A.M. Kellis, a famous Scottish mountaineer who instantly wrote to Collie upon hearing his story, because he had his own strange experience up on Ben Macdui. Atop the mountain was a cairn, a stack of stones used to mark the peak. It had been a June afternoon when Dr. Kellis and his brother Henry had been chipping for crystals on the mountain. They were on a slope some distance away from the cairn. The afternoon was quickly coming to an end and the pair were resting before beginning the descent back down, when Dr. Kellis spotted something further up the mountain where a mist had begun to roll in. They hadn't seen anyone all day, so it took him a little by surprise when Dr. Kellis spotted someone further up the mountain, but he assumed this person had just come up one of the other passes. It was strange. The person was too far away to make out any clear details, but as Kellis watched the figure moving past the cairn, he was shocked to see it pass at the same level. A little concerning, as the cairn measured about 10 feet tall. Surely his eyes must be playing tricks on him, he thought, as the figure dipped down the path and out of sight from their position. Kellis asked his brother who that was, but he didn't have an answer either. Then they suddenly saw the figure reappear just further up the path. It was moving in their direction, quickly, and the closer it got, the more its size concerned the two men. Much like everyone else in our story so far, fear got the better of them, and they fled down the mountain as fast as they could. Both Collie and Kellis's experiences were published in late 1925 and 1926, and it quickly became apparent that they were not alone. People had been seeing or hearing things on the mountain for a long time, and people began to believe that there was genuinely something up there, something that quickly became referred to as the Ben Macdui ghost, or by others as the Big Grey Man. Wendy Woods was an artist and political activist, best known as one of the founders of the National Party of Scotland, which eventually became the SNP. She was apparently unaware of the stories about the mountain when she found herself hiking it one day. It had not been an easy walk. The ground was covered in light snow that made the surface uneven, hiding many of the smaller boulders. So as she reached the entrance to the pass of La Regrue, she decided it wasn't worth proceeding any further. She would take a short break here before retracing her footsteps back down. She was admiring the view when she heard a voice piercing through the gentle howl of the wind. A loud, echoing voice. She later said it sounded like Gaelic, but it had taken her so by surprise that she couldn't really recall the exact words. She was terrified, but she tried to reassure herself. Maybe it was the bark of a deer, echoing along the pass. But then the voice came again, and this time she was sure it had come from the ground, beneath her feet. Of course, this was impossible, but that was where she was sure it was originating from. This time she was more sure. It was a human voice. Even if she couldn't understand what was being said, her mind went to the only logical explanation she could think of. Someone was injured, fallen in the snow, and crying out for help. She began desperately searching the area, trying to figure out who it was that was calling out to her, but she could find no other trace of a human being, and she brought her search to an end. She froze. The voice had stopped, and just a gentle wind remained. A chill shot down her spine. Something felt wrong. The sudden anxiety filled her entire body. She decided to head back to civilization before it got dark. But as she started her descent, she heard it too. Initially, all there had been was the gentle sound of her own steps in the snow. But then, from somewhere behind her, came the giant, echoing footsteps, following her down the mountain. When she looked, there was no one there, but still the sound followed her. She was terrified. and didn't relax until she made it back to Whitewell. Sid Scrooge would go on to become a legendary figure in the world of Scottish mountaineering, after losing a leg and his sight in World War II, but continuing his mountaineering through the rest of his life. In 1942, however, he was a simple soldier based in Avermore, as part of a division that was designed to become the first British mountain troops. On the occasional free evening, he would cycle into the Rothiemurchus forest and explore the highlands around the area. One evening, he found himself at Ben Macdui, descending to the shelter stone that overlooked Loch Aun. It was a calm, quiet evening. He smoked and watched the sun begin to set over the loch. It was then that he noticed he wasn't alone. Just a little further down he could see someone. A dark figure stepped out of the darkness of the shadowed end of the loch. He couldn't make out much of this person, just that they seemed to be dressed in a dark outfit, and seemed tall, very tall.
Pull. Pull. Pull.
Scrooge headed down to where he had seen the figure, but there was no one there, and he couldn't find any footprints either. Scrooge later speculated that this may have been the infamous Big Grey Man, but he equally worried it could have been a German agent parachuted in, although he did state that the figure appeared to not be wearing a backpack of any kind. It's a creepy little experience given everything else we have heard about the area, but it's a second story that adds weight to Scrooge's encounter. Because many years later, Catherine Allen had been hiking through the area surrounding Loch Aun with her husband's sister, and brother-in-law. They decided to camp for the night by the shelter stone, laying out their sleeping bags under the full moon. There was no wind, no sounds whatsoever, but the night was cold, so cold that it was keeping Catherine and her brother-in-law wide awake. Still, they made the most of it and appreciated the beautiful sights of the loch, when they began to hear something. Footsteps. Someone was walking across the narrow shingle beach at the end of the loch. The sound was so distinctive that they could pinpoint exactly where the person was stepping with each rustle of the shingles. But there was a problem with this, because despite hearing the footsteps, as they looked at the beach that was only 2 yards away, they could see that there was no one there. So we have these kind of two different stories going on here. Some claim to hear strange sounds stalking them on the mountain, while others physically see a presence that seems to just vanish. The footsteps in particular have been reported by so many people that we could be here all night exploring those accounts. But there are those who describe the feeling on Ben Macdui as just fear. Several people have made claims that while on the mountain, they were suddenly overcome with a sensation of being watched, that they weren't alone, and that fear drove them from the area quickly. The fear only faded once a certain distance away from the peak, many of them only finding out about the legend of the Big Grey Man after the fact. Then there are those who hear something different, not voices or footsteps, but in some cases, music, like Hugh Welsh, who was actually the president of the Cairngorms club, where Collie had shared his story. Most years Hugh would spend a couple of weeks camping with his brother up on the mountain. During this time, he said he never saw anything that he could attribute to the Big Grey Man, but on numerous occasions they claimed to hear music. It would come on, quiet at first, then build to a crescendo and fade away, this kind of strange, distorted music. At first, Hugh simply assumed it was the wind, or some other unusual atmospheric conditions that were making sound travel strangely. But he experienced it day and night, in good weather and bad. Along with it, on several occasions, he also heard voices, both the sounds of women and men talking, but there was never anyone around at these times, and he could never make out what exactly was being said. On a few trips they were accompanied by others, but curiously, when Hugh or his brother would point out the sounds, the others couldn't hear them at all. That doesn't mean Hugh and his brother were alone in experiencing this specific phenomenon though. Others have reported hearing these sounds on separate occasions, which is a strange detail, as though only certain people can hear it. Although some years later, Hugh would also experience the infamous footsteps following him across the mountain. One other example comes from a 1926 experience from Seton Gordon, who claimed that while hiking the mountain with a friend, his companion kept asking him who was playing the pipes. Seton couldn't hear anything, but his friend was convinced that someone was walking along nearby, playing on a set of pipes. While Seton couldn't hear them, he did state that there was something unsettling about the atmosphere there. What I like about the tales of the Big Grey Man is that these stories feel somewhat grounded. They are odd feelings, brief sightings, unexplained sounds. But over the years, interesting theories have popped up about what's going on here, because there are a number of people who believe the mountain is somehow a place of great psychic power, and that some people are able to tap into this power. People like Joan Grant, who was an author and someone who believed that she had a kind of psychic awareness that she had experienced all of her life. One day she found herself hiking through the nearby Rothamacus forest with her husband. Their destination was the Cairngorms, and they were looking forward to a pleasant Sunday in the mountains. But after stopping for lunch, they thought the heat was too much on that particular day, and decided to head towards one of the villages instead. But before they could leave, Joan was filled with what she could only describe as an intense fear. She turned and began sprinting along the path, her confused husband giving chase, begging to know what was wrong. She just screamed at him to run. It was hard to put into words, but in Joan's mind, she felt like they were being chased by something inhuman. Then suddenly, after running for half a mile, it felt like she broke through an invisible wall, and the fear just stopped. Whatever was after them was gone. Years later, Joan was quoted by author Affleck Gray as saying, "I wish I could give you an explanation for my panic, but I can only presume that I inadvertently tuned into an acute terror of someone who had a great deal of energy still locked up in that place." Peter Densham spent many years surrounding World War II being in charge of airplane rescues in the Cairngorms. He had two experiences on Ben Macdui that he couldn't explain, and brought up a piece of local folklore that few of the other accounts seem to mention. There are claims that when people are overcome with fear on the mountain, if they happen to be near a specific spot called Lurcher's Crag, they will attempt to throw themselves over the edge, with several bodies apparently being found in this area. Densham found himself alone on the mountain one day in 1945. He had heard some sounds that he thought were a little strange, but he simply dismissed them as the sound of rocks expanding and contracting, and continued his walk. At one point he decided to stop to eat some chocolate, when suddenly he was overcome with the sensation that he wasn't alone, that someone was standing right next to him. Again he tried to brush this off. Many mountaineers have experienced this sensation while alone on a mountain. It was just the mind playing tricks on them. But then he felt an odd, cold feeling at the top of his neck, which soon turned into a kind of pressure. A little weirded out, Densham stood up, and that was when he heard the crunching of footsteps coming from the cairn. He approached the cairn to see if anyone was there, but there wasn't. Initially he was curious, even a little excited. Could he really be having his first experience with the fabled big grey man, he thought. But for seemingly no reason, that intrigue quickly turned to overwhelming fear. Something deep within him told him he needed to leave, and leave quickly. He ran as fast as he could. Years later, he said he counted himself lucky that he was still in control of his senses, because for a brief moment his mind had escaped him, and as he came back to a sudden consciousness, he realised he was running right towards the edge of Lurcher's Crag. He managed to stop himself, turning his path before heading over the edge, but he said it was hard, as though his body didn't want to change direction. It wanted to jump into the abyss. He then raced down the rest of the mountain, shaken by what he had experienced. On another occasion, he was on mountain rescue duty with his friend, Richard Frerry, searching for a plane that had gone down in the area. It turned out to be a false alarm when the pair rested near the cairn at the summit of Ben Macdui, when Densham noticed that his friend was talking to someone. He walked around the cairn to see who was there, but there was no one. Richard was talking to himself. What made this whole thing even stranger, though, was that Densham then joined the conversation. In his recounting, he didn't or couldn't say what they spoke about, but it was like they were both having a conversation with someone who wasn't really there. Again, they are not alone. One of the most famous accounts from Ben Macdui features two men walking through the mist on the mountain, having a conversation with someone who they thought was a fellow hiker just a few feet away, only to discover they were alone. Densham's friend Richard Frerry had another experience where he was alone on the mountain and was accompanied on his walk by what he described as someone singing that followed him all day. He also spoke to numerous others who had experienced odd encounters on the mountain, including one man who claimed he was camping one night when he was awoken by the feeling that someone was outside his tent. He heard the person walk away, and plucking up his courage he went out to take a look, only to reportedly see a large brown figure walking off into the distance. Richard Frerry was genuinely unsettled by his experience with the singing. He knows all of this seems impossible, but he had what I felt was a powerful call to those who doubt the experiences of those who have encountered the strange on Ben Macdui. He encouraged them to come with him up the mountain, to stand on it as day begins to fade into night. I will quote him directly for these final lines. "Though your nerves be of steel, and your mind says it cannot be, you will be acquainted with that fear without a name, that intense dread of the unknown that has pursued mankind from the very dawn of time." So what really happened? We have decades of claims of experiences with the big grey man we could dissect, but what struck me is that when I first heard this story, it was presented much more like a cryptid case, something similar to Bigfoot. But actually, reading the accounts, it does feel like it fits a lot more into the realm of ghosts. Odd sounds, apparitions, intense feelings. Only a handful seem to describe the being as a physical creature. And this is also where it starts to get tricky to dissect, because it really isn't a singular phenomenon. These stories are all a little different. There are recurring themes, but it's not a set experience that each person has. Let's look at the skeptical arguments first, before we get into the strange. The most common idea that is used to debunk the big grey man is the phenomenon known as the Brocken spectre. A Brocken spectre is an optical illusion that occurs when a person stands on a mountain or a high ridge, with the sun behind them, casting their shadow onto mist or cloud below. The shadow often appears enormous due to perspective. To someone unfamiliar with the phenomenon, the towering haloed figure can appear ghostly or supernatural, leading to centuries of myths and eerie sightings in mountainous regions. It is worth noting how many of the Grey Man stories feature a mist rolling in. The Brocken Spectre has certainly terrified many mountaineers and hikers over the years, but often this fear will disappear once they realise that the giant shadowy figure is mimicking the movements of the observer. And that's where this explanation struggles a bit, because in the few stories where the figure is actually sighted, its movements don't seem to correspond with the movements of the witness. What's more, numerous witnesses stated that they knew what a Brocken Spectre was, and what they saw wasn't that. Still, it's hard not to use this to potentially dismiss some of the claims of a giant figure that resides in the mountains. When we look at these stories, one thing that keeps popping up is a sudden unexplainable fear, and it's hard not to think of infrasound in these circumstances. Infrasound refers to extremely low frequency sound waves below the range of normal human hearing. This phenomenon is often associated with machinery and man-made constructions, but it can be produced by natural sources such as earthquakes, storms, ocean waves, and even strong winds interacting with landscapes. On mountains, infrasound can be generated by powerful gusts moving through valleys and ridges, as well as by rockfalls and shifting weather systems. Some researchers have suggested that exposure to intense infrasound may contribute to feelings of unease, anxiety, or other odd feelings, which has led to speculation about its role in some reports of strange experiences in remote mountain environments. But infrasound isn't the only possibility here. One possible explanation is the third man factor, where climbers in extreme conditions report sensing an unseen presence or companion, often during periods of exhaustion or isolation. This is something many of you brought up in the comments on my Shepton Mine episode. Other explanations include hypoxia, which can affect judgment and perception, or sensory deprivation in the vast silent landscapes, and the body's natural fight or flight response being triggered by subtle environmental cues. For many climbers, the irrational fear reported on mountains may be the brain's response to an environment where isolation and physical stress combine to create a heightened sense of threat. Although, while Ben Macdui is a high peak for Britain, it's hard to imagine that some of these mountaineers who have experiences in the Himalayas and on Everest succumbing to these extreme effects on this mountain. But of course it is a likely explanation. My thoughts went to the idea that these factors could cause an intense fear that, if familiar with the Big Grey Man stories, could merge together into an experience. You feel an inexplicable level of fear, you think about the stories, and you begin to believe that you are having an experience with the Big Grey Man himself. But where that idea falls down is the many accounts where people claim to not know the stories, or from a time before the tales became widely known. There is, of course, the possibility that this is all a combination of these factors, mixed in with the folklore of the area. But what about the paranormal ideas? Many with spiritual beliefs seem to believe that Ben Macdui and the surrounding areas hold some kind of energy, that these sightings and experiences represent a kind of peek beyond the veil, at something that we can't quite understand. The journalist J.W. Herries wrote in 1949 that there could be something in the nature of Ben Macdui itself that had a stimulating effect on the psychic faculty of mankind, an ability that lies dormant, only being set off under certain conditions and in certain places. In that same year, there was an undoubtedly religious element added to the Big Grey Man, when Sir Hugh Rankin and Lady Rankin apparently met the Big Grey Man on Ben Macdui, but rather than being a ghost or some kind of abominable snowman, they believed he was in fact a bodhisattva. A bodhisattva is a figure in Buddhism who has attained the potential for enlightenment but chooses to delay entering nirvana in order to help guide and liberate others. They represent compassion and selflessness, dedicating their experience to easing the suffering of all sentient beings, although the couple referred to him as one of the 5 perfected men, who they say meet each year in the Himalayas to control the lives of us all. When their work is done, the big grey man would seemingly return to Ben Macdui, his regular home. Then there are the UFOs. Numerous sightings of strange lights have been spotted over the mountain over the years, and a small group believes that the big grey man is actually a being from another world, that the mountain is a place of great interest for those who come from beyond the stars. The other idea that I know a number of you will be shouting at me in the comments if I don't bring it up is the Fae. In many different European cultures throughout history, the fairy folk have been a recurring theme, and they are said to inhabit places like forests and mountains. Traditionally, they are not always portrayed as benevolent creatures. They could be mysterious, unpredictable, and capable of leading travellers astray, creating illusions or causing strange experiences. Some have suggested that the eerie reports associated with Ben Macdui, including feelings of dread, the unexplained sounds, and encounters with a mysterious presence, could be interpreted through the lens of ancient Fae beliefs. And it does match up. The Fae angle is the easiest paranormal explanation that would cover the wide range of strange reports in the mountains, even if you don't actually believe in fairies. The folklore of them is clearly playing a part in the tone of the claimed sightings. Fairies don't actually have to be real for someone to be influenced by the idea of them. But the idea that stuck with me, as presented by an experienced climber called J.A. Parker, is that something on this mountain doesn't want the climbers there. He painted this as the idea of a ghost, someone who may have lost their life on the mountain and is now trying to keep others away. I don't know if I can accept such a specific idea, but there does seem to be something at play here. Countless people, some of whom are regarded as widely respected individuals, have said that there is something wrong with this mountain, that there is something up there, even if they couldn't tell you what it was. And that is enough for me. I can't help but think, the next time I find myself hiking up a mountain, if the wind whistles through the rocks in such a way that the sound bends and distorts, that I won't think for just a moment, what if that wasn't just the wind? What if I'm not alone up here? That's all for this entry into the tape library. My main source for this one was The Big Grey Man of Ben Macdui by Gray Affleck. Really, you don't need to look up any other books on this subject. He spent decades collecting all of these encounters and sharing the stories. It's genuinely a fantastic book, and if you can find a copy, I would strongly recommend checking it out if you want to dive into the topic deeper. If you enjoyed this episode, as always, please be sure to click like if you're watching on YouTube, or leave a rating on your podcast platform of choice. These little interactions really help to keep the show being pushed out to a wider audience, so it's always appreciated. I mentioned this in a prior episode, but releases are going to slow down a bit over the summer. There will be a bonus going out in August, so I won't be totally gone. But really, this marks the end of this season of the tape library. It won't be a long break though. I'll be back full time in September. So if you want to be sure not to miss out, please click subscribe or follow to ensure you get notified when the next deep dive comes out. In the meantime, I hope you all enjoy your summer. And if you really are in need of some ghost stories, I have a pretty big catalogue these days to keep you busy. Until next time, my friends, pleasant dreams. As always, this episode was made possible by my supporters on Patreon, so it's time to read out their credits. First up are tape library archivists Sapphire, Simon Ulas, Agent 355, Dina Compton, Gordon, Thomas Brown, Michelle, Nexor, E.H., Guillotine, Alex Wiles, Michelle Desnoyer, Orson Welles, Paranormal Phoenix, Swiss Tony 10, Meow Mare, The Laughing Tabby, Cerise Wells, Alice, Julian M, Yolanthra's Blood, Jennifer, Shan Harding, Melissa Waldrolt, Adam M, Cryptic Clyde, Adam Grantham, The Magic Pumpkin, Lucas Wiles, Yenok, Aurora, Lee Borix Johnson, Nauman Zem, Pat McShay, Pantherpaw, The Elusive M, The Bisexual Mooncult, Emulated Phoenix, Jamie Long, Damn It David Marcus, G Martinez, Lisa Mary Sheridan, Gaffy the G, Plum Blossom, Gina Britton, Emily Carlin, Sarah Boyd, Thomas Boatwright, Stephen Lutman, Crystal E, West Virginia Vegetable Man, Dawn Swan, Tina S, Sean Miller, Juno, Joseph Condola, Jolly Jedi, Pixelina, Joe, The Crimson DM, Detective, Jean Janine, Darla, Alfredo Sandoval, Midia Zabine, Dominic DeAngelis, Dagon O'Dorleg, Judith Hacker, Eric Salas, Mirashard, Adeline, Ashlar's Books, Gabrielle and Sandy Lusk. Then we have our amazing lead archivists, Cassandra Baker, Summer Chambers, Bunny Gasmask, Sage, Dr. Thunderous Phantom PhD, Sandy W, Yvonne Rivers, Jennifer, Amy Stubblefield, The Original Deer, Emmy Bartley, Lady Bet Noir, Rick Diculous, London Grace, Melissa Harrison, Emperor Franz, Plague Doctor is in, Xavier Rangel, Sergei Kelly, Alex O'Neill, Tyler Michael, Alex Goldberg, Van Yell, Brian Baker, and 1000th Ghost, and our insanely generous Grand Overseers, Lauren Murray, Zarcastic, Win Lewis, the God Emperor of Mankind, Old Soul Like Mine, Harrison the Ogre-Lord, Shannon in Seattle, Leah Carmella, Bad Diddle, Katie, Morning Rain 2619, and Queen of Flatulence. Thank you so much to all of them, all of my junior archivists and my members on YouTube. Each and every one of you plays a huge part in keeping the show going. I really couldn't do this without you. If you want to join the archivists, links can be found in the description. It's a really nice community over on Patreon, and you can even join for free. So come say hi over there. See you all soon.